Welcome to Flight Level Zero. It all starts here. I'm Joe Peebles, your host. Welcome to the show. If you are a veteran and you need help, support, or just need somebody to talk to, please call the Veterans Crisis Line, dial 988 and press 1. Everything's confidential. They just want to get you help. What you're going through is a unique situation that only service members and their families understand, so please reach out to the people who get it. Flight Level Zero is brought to you by our sponsor, JP Aero. JP Aero is a mobile maintenance AOG provider that provides support for 135 and Part 91 operators. We provide quick, reliable service in the Southeast USA. If you have a downed aircraft, MELs, or just need somebody to do regular service checks, please call us at 833-807-3131 or email aog@jpaerotechnics.com. If you're new to the show, this is Flight Level Zero. We talk about a few things here. We bring in aviation industry professionals and talk about their journey. We talk about self-development and how to become a dominating factor in life and in industry. We talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of life and the tools that you can use to help overcome the hard times that inevitably will come. We have 3 types of shows here. We have full-length episodes. Today is a full-length episode where we bring on a guest and we talk to them about their story. We have solo episodes, which those would just be me, 10 to 15 minutes, talking about something that's going on in the industry or some things that I've learned over the years that I feel like is important to pass on to you. And then we have Q&As. So questions and answers. You send me a question on LinkedIn and I try to find an answer. If I don't know an answer, I'll bring on a professional that does. We'll talk about your questions and we'll get those answers for you. So please, if you got anything that you have questions about, please write me on LinkedIn at Joe Peebles. And we'll get back to you as soon as possible with that. If you like the show, if it makes you think, if it makes you smile, please like and share the show. Leave a review on whatever platform you listen to. It helps us grow the show. It helps our brand get out. Thank you for listening. We greatly appreciate it. All right, now that we're done talking about business, let's get down to the real business. Today, I'm super excited. Good friend of mine. We've known each other for a couple of years. He is a really good leader in the aviation space, and I'm proud to have him as a friend. I want to introduce everybody to my good friend, Brent Wiggins. What's up, Brent? How are you doing, man?
Great, Joe. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, Brent, you've always been a leader since I've known you. You've been a leader in the space, man. And so I've always looked up to you as far as being present with your guys and understanding the way that the culture is moving within your company. And so, like I said, man, thank you for coming in. All right, so let's start out. Brent, where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up, man? Did you grow up knowing that you're going to be in aviation?
Funny enough, I didn't. So, I mean, if you can't tell by my accent, it's kind of probably my worst attribute, right? I grew up in Mississippi, central Mississippi. So I actually had no idea what I was going to do until I was about 8 years old. And then I decided my uncle had given me the opportunity. He was actually flying levees and helicopters to film for the Corps of Engineers. And I got an opportunity to fly in a helicopter like 8 years old. And since then, I was hooked in aviation. I was going to become a helicopter pilot. That was my anticipation. And then I decided I just got sucked into the maintenance world. So here I am today.
Yeah. Well, we have something in common. Helicopters was like my bread and butter. And so I thought I'd be a helicopter pilot too. But here I am today as well, stuck in the maintenance side. Yeah, for sure. So how did you get into maintenance? What pulled you outside of the idea of being a helicopter pilot and made you do what you do today?
So that's an interesting question, because ultimately I decided that while I was going to flight school that I needed to learn how to work on them, because I wanted to be kind of dual role, be able to work on helicopters, airplanes, all that stuff. And so I decided the quickest way for me to do that was to actually go to school to do it. And so when I went to school, it just, ever since that point in time, it consumed me, and flying just kind of went off the wayside. And I just went into the maintenance world from there. And just kind of, I got it the direction of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go. It just felt right. And so that's where I dove off into.
Yeah. So were you mechanically inclined, being from Mississippi down in that little area? Did you grow up on a farm or something like that? Or
no, crazy enough, I never enjoyed necessarily working on stuff. I didn't like working on my car or anything like that. Everybody has these cool stories about working on things. I never just did that as a kid or anything like that. It was never like a passion at that point. Until I got into actually working on airplanes, I think the passion became more of fixing problems. That was more of the passion that I had at that moment. And I was able to utilize that to fix problems on aircraft, right? So I think that's what kind of drugged me in at that point in time into the maintenance world.
Interesting. Yeah, I am always jealous of guys who are like super mechanically inclined and fix stuff around their house and fix stuff on their own car. Because I'm not that guy. I literally learned how to fix helicopter engines and helicopters, and then I learned how to build jets. And those are the only mechanically things that I do. I don't bring your car over to me. My dad's like, oh, my radiator is not working on my car. I'm like, well, there's the shop. You know what I'm saying? Like, take it to the shop. Don't bring it to me because I don't know anything about that crap. It's always been funny. But yeah, man, a lot of the guys that I work with, man, they're talking about how much boost they put on their truck, you know, and all this stuff. And I'm like, it's speaking Chinese to me, man. I don't know what you're talking about. Does it go fast? Like,
I would agree with that because, like, for me, I guess the way I look at it is I work on things at work. I don't work on things at home, right? So I don't want to go home and change my own oil. I know it's a terrible way of looking at things, but at the same time, I just like to take my time away to be time away, not necessarily working on things, right? Other than myself.
Yeah.
Of course I do
for
that.
Sure.
But.
We kind of talked about that earlier. We'll definitely dig into that here in a little bit. So yeah, man. So you get out of school for getting your license. You kind of like already cut off the whole idea of you're going to be a pilot, right? But you like the idea of solving problems. So let's talk about you getting out of there. How did you find work after you got out of school? Was it pretty simple? Did you kind of walk into? Okay.
Yeah, so I already had some connections externally to the school anyway. Where I grew up, there was an actual helicopter operation, as well as probably like an hour and a half away from where I grew up was another helicopter outfit that actually did ag spray.
Okay.
For the Forestry Service. So that's what I got into the ag world. And then from there, you know, a buddy of mine, we had talked and we were in A&P school together, and he was actually working on King Airs for L3. So he had got me, I was like, hey, I want to try that out. It sounded pretty cool. It was a contract position for military contractors. And so I jumped into it just because it sounded cool. It sounded better than working on ag spray and helicopters, to be honest. So I jumped into that, and it just kind of took off from there. Ended up moving out to California, came back to Mississippi. So there was some trajectory changes inside of there that kind of helped guide me in the direction of being able to kind of even get into a leadership position that I didn't know about, right?
Okay. Working
on transport category aircraft such as King Air 350 allowed me the opportunity to have the qualifications to be able to be a DON for a 135 operator.
Okay.
So that's when I started getting into leadership, was a DOM role for a 135 operation.
Yeah. And, you know, nowadays King Air 350 guys are a dime a dozen. There's not much out there. So if you know anything about a King Air, call me. Call me stat. They're really cool. The thing I like about the King Air is that it's super mechanical. Most of it you can figure out with the wrench, you know. And I don't have a ton of experience on them, mostly on helicopters, but the King Airs that I have worked, anything that I've done, it's mostly just, it's a giant machine. There's not a lot of avionics or electrical problems with that airframe.
Well, it's amazing to me, Joe, that like a lot of people don't necessarily want to work on helicopters because of all the moving parts, but you know, I actually enjoyed it just because the detail that you had to have when working on the helicopter, right? Like you had to be super detailed in what you were doing because again, it doesn't just necessarily glide. I mean, they call the Jesus nut for a reason, right? So you got to make sure all that stuff is properly done. I mean, it's just the detail in it was something that intrigued me more or less. And the fact that I didn't know anybody that really wanted to do it, I was like, well, that's something I want to do.
Yeah. And dude, I have to 100% agree with you on that. Is you get a helicopter mechanic and you put them side to side with a guy who's worked fixed wing his whole life. There is a obvious difference in the output from the helicopter mechanic as far as finished product. And I mean, you can see it just on safety wires and on cotter keys, which is the simplest things, but you can see a major difference. And I think that's one thing that has kept me up to par because I wasn't a jet guy. I'm jet guy now, but what got me there was being incredibly meticulous about all the little things. One of our rules when I worked on helicopters was like, make sure when the pilot comes, he knows you're here. So it's like just cleaning it up, making sure everything's clean because they sling grease and oil everywhere. And so one of the major things we did was like, you can't inspect it if it's dirty, clean it up. So most helicopters you see out there are going to be, if they've got a maintainer that's working on them continuously, they're pretty pristine inside the engine bay and the transmission bay and all that stuff. They're usually really well kept. At least the ones that I worked on are, but
except the ag spray in helicopters when they come back.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, those things are probably filthy. Yeah, I there's a joke we used to say when I worked on helicopters, and that was wings are for fairies. And we just made fun of anybody who didn't work on helicopters because there's a lot of pride in working on helicopters and being meticulous and understanding that, if this bolt is turned the wrong way, it can cause a problem in flight. I see it all the time now looking at stuff. I'm like, who did this? Like, why did they do it like this? It doesn't make any sense. Or, oh God, that looks so sloppy. Like, I just want to fix it, clean it up and make it look better.
Absolutely.
Drives me nuts.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that's kind of the way it's been on King Airs too, in all honesty. King Air mechanics are pretty meticulous about how they move stuff. And I'm not sure if that's because it's got props on it or what. I don't know where they tie in. But it's like the idea of having a super polished look when you're done doesn't apply when you're working on something like a flap for some reason. I'm not sure.
That's true.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, the King Air, it's a fantastic aircraft. I mean, again, you kind of have to be mechanically inclined or think mechanically to be able to work on it because it's not like the typical jet plug and play stuff, things like that. I mean, it's definitely some mechanical things that go on with that aircraft in particular, engine rigging, all that fun stuff that comes along with it. It's a lot more mechanical than most jets these days. So it is, I would say it's helped me kind of shape and add on to even the helicopter experience. So I definitely appreciated the King Air experience for certain.
Yeah. So you said that it gave you an opportunity to move into a leadership DOM position. So what does a DOM do? What does a director of maintenance do in a MRO environment?
So when I moved in kind of to the DOM position for the 135, It's kind of a different scenario than even the 145, right? So I'll kind of, if you don't mind, I'll go into the details of the 135 a little bit and just say it's all encompassing, right? I mean, you're responsible for the aircraft, you're responsible for the maintenance on it, everything in between the bills, all the fun stuff like you're responsible for. So that, thankfully I had the opportunity to do it at a younger age and have that DOM experience to a point to where it helped shape what I needed to look for in the future and what I needed to expect out of myself in the future. It's kind of one of those eye-opening experiences where I was like, man, I would never fucking actually handle the challenge. But then again, I'm also like, well, if I don't get into it, I'll never know.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it a shot, right?
Yeah. Moving into that position, I like the fact that you're like questioning yourself. I don't know if this is something I can do. A lot of times we run into that space is like, I don't know if I'm ready for this. And I feel like a majority of people, we sit back and we analyze, and unless it's perfect, we don't take that step to move into this thing that's uncomfortable for us. But whenever you do move into a new space, it's going to be uncomfortable regardless. And so I think that being able to just take that step and the leap of faith and have that trust in yourself that I will be able to do this, is important. So yeah, I'm sure that in a 135, the DOM is like, I imagine a chicken running with his head cut off, like putting out fires.
for all the 135 DOMs out there, I
Yeah.
understand what you're going through, because he's the worst guy in the whole operation, because it's nothing but a money. It's nothing but a money
Yeah.
suck every time an airplane goes down or anything like that. Whereas 145, it's a little bit different perspective, because we're managing, trying to get the airplane back up. So it's a revenue generator at that point.
Yeah. So you were in the 135 space. You did that for a while, and now you're in the 145 space. So what's the difference between the DOM in the 135 and the DOM in the 145 for you?
The difference is managing equipment and managing people, right? I mean, from the 145 standpoint, you're managing people more than you're managing equipment from a 135 standpoint. So I think that was kind of the shift for me. Although it helped me, the 135 DOM role helped me to kind of network, get to know people, understand the industry a lot more, even from the jet world. It helped me create those connections and network. So for that, that's where I would say I'm grateful for even that opportunity, because I don't think I would have had that opportunity had I not jumped into that position. And it would be a lot more difficult.
So did you like being a 135 or the DOM in the 135 space? Which one do you prefer? Do you like the 145 or the 135 better for you yourself?
145, 1,000%. So,
yeah.
I mean, the 135 is great, but it's just it's different. I don't know how to explain it other than it's different, right? I mean, when you're younger and you maybe don't have family life, anything like that, it's great because you can dive off into it and run with it and put in the time that's necessary, right? But when you're trying to hang out with family, spend time with them, watch your kids grow up, it becomes a little difficult and cumbersome. So the people that actually do it, and I commend them day in and day out, because it's not the easy job for sure.
Yeah. And I asked that question because you never know until you try. And sometimes you got to try a couple things before you figure out what you really like. I worked in a lot of MROs before I went and worked for you, and man, I didn't like any of it. In all honesty, I was really good at it, and in the beginning it was always fun and interesting because there was different stuff to do. But some MROs were like super laid back to where we didn't have work except for 10 days of the month. And so for 20 days, we had to show up and clock in, but just sit there and stare at the wall for 20 days of the month. And then other places were just busy, which was great. And I like that. I did like that. I like to stay busy. But then I come and work for you in that whole field. And I kind of like found my thing, like this is what I'm good at. This is what I like. And although we did put in a ton of freaking hours doing it, I've kind of been doing that my whole career, and I didn't even realize it, like everywhere I worked. So when I worked at Gulfstream in the 650 plant, I worked in every department. And it's not because I got transferred to every department. I applied for every department because I wanted to know everything I could about the airframe. And after a couple years, I became the guy who started the internal AOG team, basically. And we ran around. I had 5 guys that worked with me. And then on the weekend, I had whoever wanted to work overtime. But we would literally go to every department and fix all the problems they had in departments so that Monday when work started, everybody was caught up. And so like that's what I did, man. And we kept the planes rolling because we had moved from like a 26-day rate all the way down to a 3-day move rate. So the fuselage would be in that spot for 3 days, and at 3 days it had to move whether they were done or not. And so my team would come in and make sure that they were done with all the stuff that needed to get done, or fix any of the internal discrepancies that were found among that time. And so I thrive in that situation. And so I learned like, oh, I really like this. And then through working on helicopters and going through medical helicopters, and then going to a flight engineer flying over to Europe and Africa and doing all this crazy swoopy stuff, which was fun, but it wasn't my thing. And I really found like I like when the pressure's high, and it's time to like really get in. And I like to troubleshoot. And I kind of like the idea, like I'm the last guy to touch that plane, and I figured out what the problem was, and now it's back in the air making revenue for the company. So I wouldn't know that unless I just tried a whole bunch of crap. is what I'm trying to say. And you wouldn't know that you liked this more than you like the other unless you tried both, And I think it's important for people to understand you've got to try things outside of your comfort zone to know if you like it. You might love it. You might go in that 135 DOM spot and be like, this is my jam, but you never know unless you try it.
That's true. And I think that's where a lot of my drive came from too, was just getting a little uncomfortable, right? Getting a little uncomfortable helped me to realize that I can be confident in myself and wherever I go and whatever I do. So like right now, I feel confident that if you gave me another job, then I could handle the same thing, right? And I think that confidence level comes from the ability to maneuver in those uncomfortable moments and actually kind of make things happen at those points in time. Now, what could you say I was successful at those points in time? No, I mean, there was a lot of learning opportunities. I'll say that, right?
Yeah.
It really putting your feet to the fire, created a lot of learning opportunities for me as a person, but also like how I need to progress forward, but also helped me to learn who I was and what I needed to do and what I needed to address personally, to be better.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier this morning about self-development and kind of how you stumbled upon that, and now you're like really into that whole space mentally. So let's dive into that, man. What is the meaning of what's happened? Like what shifted your mindset here recently to kind of put you into that space?
So, I mean, I guess it's probably been a few years, Joe. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of what I dive into myself personally has been just more of I didn't think the way we were going, even as an industry in aviation, was the right direction. I didn't think that how we treated people and how I've seen people treated, how I was treated sometimes in the industry, I didn't think, like, I know how I felt at that time. So it was an opportunity for me to reverse the role and say, hey, how can I do better and be better for the people that I come in contact with? And so something inside of COVID that kind of triggered that, right? I mean, my wife at the time had went through a layoff. And so I got to feel like what a layoff felt like from a different perspective, not the one doing it, but the one actually receiving it. Right. And see what it looked like. So that actually helped me to do a deep dive into myself and say, there's gotta be a better way. Like leadership has to be better than just telling people what to do and them listening. And if they don't, then, you punish and do all this other stuff too. Like leadership is more than that. And I think that's where a lot of the struggle comes in our industry and leadership in general. I mean, you go to a restaurant, that's the first thing I'm looking at is like, how do the employees interact? Because that tells me like what type of leadership there is. And then if I see a manager walking the restaurant floor, I'm watching their demeanor, all this stuff, to make sure like who they are as a person, because, those are the things that I also take and self-reflect on and say, okay, well, do I do those things? Do I put this off to our team? Do I put this off to my team? And do they see these things in me? And if they do, then is that a problem? Absolutely, sometimes. So I think a lot of that growth came from just having a different perspective, and shifting my perspective from being the guy to being the receiving guy, right? And saying, okay, if I were in their shoes, how would I want to receive it? How would I want to do this? How would I want to do that? And I think that kind of helps grow of that challenge me to be better and figure that out. Like, how do I communicate better? How do I, have hard conversations better? How do I, have customer conversations better without, frustrating customers and things like that? Like all those things matter in what you do every day with leadership and all of the above. So I think it's extremely important for individuals to self-grow. I mean, that's the most I can say is like, you got to work on you, in all aspects, and understand that, we're not perfect people. We have to work on ourselves.
Yeah. And so when you speak about working on yourself, it sounds like there's a lot of reflection, like looking in the mirror type deal, where you're watching other leaders I think that's something I did in the military was I would watch my leaders that I liked and leaders that I didn't like and see how they operated. I've never been in like a real leadership position per se, you know what I'm saying? And so it rings a little different coming from somebody who's leading a large team versus me who leads a 5-man team, but you learn from all of these. You learn from the good leaders and the bad leaders in your life, and you learn what not to do from watching those people. And something Sarah Calmetta said at NBAA this year, she said not to treat people how you want to be treated, but to treat people how they want to be treated, which I thought was profound. I thought it was really good. It's like, how do you treat others? How does that, as a leader and as you reflect on yourself? I think the one of the biggest things as a leader is being able to look in the mirror and say, I messed up, or I'm not doing this right. How do I fix this for myself? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about is.
Absolutely. And I think, and even Joe, you were kind of involved with my team whenever I was probably going through some of that transition phase, right? Which is, I mean, you get to see a different perspective also in like how that transpired, as well as like that transition a little bit for me. And some people, amazingly enough, they don't see a transition for years. So, I mean, it could be later on in life that they actually finally get a transition. And for me, I'm just thankful that it came sooner than later, right? So
Yeah.
that I was able to take a stance on it and make a move.
Well, it was kind of like a forced change in life kind of brought that to your attention, and somebody who was super close to you was heavily affected by a decision that somebody else made, and maybe they didn't handle it right, and it didn't sit right with you, and then it was like an epiphany happened in your head. Because I was with you when COVID happened. I remember you calling me and telling me to carry Clorox, and I think I was heading to like Charlotte, North Carolina to work on an airplane. And you were like, make sure you wipe down the telephone, wipe down the room with bleach, like all this stuff, I remember those conversations because it was insane. The time of the world was nuts. We were wiping down the trucks every day, like it was freaking crazy. But I do remember you before then and how you've led. And I don't know you now the way that I used to know you, but I do know people on your team because I see them here in Atlanta all the time. And they all speak very highly of you. They all speak very highly of your counterparts, and they speak of, man, they're creating a culture here that I like, I love being a part of this team. I feel like I mean something here, and that's like the best thing you can hear as a leader. I feel it's like they 100% trust you, what I'm saying? But creating a culture like that is difficult, especially when you're changing from the norm of a different culture before that. So how has that been for you, creating this culture of leadership throughout your team? Because an AOG technician is a leader in its own respect. You're playing in big boy world. You don't have somebody telling you what to do, when to show up, and all that stuff. You're really just like figuring it all out and being super resourceful yourself. So how do you build a team for a remote group like that, or a culture in that team like that?
I think it goes back to like working on yourself, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, when I was going somewhat through the transition, I quickly realized in doing the discovery and researching and reading books and doing all this other fun stuff that a lot of people do not know what true leadership is. A lot of people think that they've seen true leadership. A lot of people emulate people that they've come in contact with, whether it be mentors or what have you. But I think we did a study on it a while back, right when all this transition kind of started. I started doing a study on it myself to see like how many people actually come in with leadership abilities, who has it naturally. And I think I forgot what the exact numbers were. I'd have to look it up, Joe, but it was a crazy number, such as like 40% of, or maybe it was 60% of leaders actually just emulate people that they've come in contact with. They don't have any leadership abilities. So realistically, we have 60% of leaders that are constantly emulated people they've worked with, and what if those people didn't have the right sauce either to be a true leader for the people that was needed? And so now we continue the trend and the cycle. And when I saw that statistic, it was more of like an eye opener, like I've got to break the cycle for myself. I've got to break the cycle for the people that I come in contact with and help them. So that's when I started doing even leadership training within our team, just to kind of like give people a different viewpoint of leadership, because there's a lot of myths that come along with it that I was aware of, but you don't realize it until you're in a leadership role that they're myths to leadership. Like you don't do this type of stuff, right? So getting people to understand those things and actually study those things and dive into it and try to want to be better and understand it actually helped me too, because I'm having to teach something, right? So now I've got to build myself to be able to teach something at the same time. So kind of that's where it started going. And that's where I started diving in deeper, was just the fact of trying to teach others what I was learning, because I felt the more information I got, the more I was like, this information has to get out. Like people have to know about it because it took me this long to get there. I want others not to have to take that long to get there, right? Like I want to see a change in my lifetime, right?
Yeah. One of my mentors always says, be the change that you want to see. And so starting that change with yourself and figuring out how to make yourself better, inevitably other people are going to see that and be attracted to that, you know? But yeah, I'm doing this research right now while you were talking about that. And it says 77% of businesses report that leadership is lacking, you know, which is astounding.
Which is good for me, right? That's the way I look at it, is the more I grow and the more I do, like the more opportunities there are for leaders, and for me to make better leaders myself, to actually help grow other people and other companies or whatever the case may be, because I just think that's a terrible statistic, man. And let me see if I could actually pull up the data research that I had at the time, but it was very interesting information.
Yeah. I mean, I'm super interested in it because I'm on a self-development journey myself. Really, about a year before I left you guys, I started getting on this self-development mindset and really started reading and diving into books, and reading books like Extreme Ownership from Jocko Willink, and like finding people that are actual really good leaders and finding literature that they've put out and reading that type of stuff. Because you're right. A lot of people are just catching this idea of leadership. What's leadership? Oh, that's sitting in the office with my feet kicked up on the thing, and people walk in and I say, get out, that's leadership.
Or telling people what to do. And it's definitely not that. So I brought it up, and this was kind of the eye-opening one for me, is 59% of managers supervising one or two employees received no management training. So 60% of managers supervising one or two employees received no management training. And then 41% of managers supervising 3 to 5 employees also received no training.
Wow.
And then 42% of managers developed their leadership style through observation alone.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. And it's not just in our industry. It's everywhere. Right. So what type of leadership training are you guys doing for your team or for yourself? Like what type of leadership development training are you doing? I know you said you're reading. Are there any specific books that you recommend if somebody's like trying to figure out what a real leader is or what a real leader is doing? What do you recommend to read?
Man, there's so many things to read, Joe. And I think you and I talked about this morning, but the biggest one that I'm on right now is Nick Saban, and trying to figure out like how he made at Alabama happen, right? Because when you think about this in layman's terms, he took his most senior guys he lost every single year, and he brought in a new class every single year. And so for 10 years straight, like they were a top-notch team. How do you do that, and how do you get people in the same wavelength? And one of the things that he talked about was like, stop worrying about the outcome, start worrying about the process. That they never worried about the outcome And he didn't have a mindset shift until he was 47 years old in 1998. And you can hear him talk about it, but it's the most incredible thing to think about, that he didn't have a shift in his mindset until he was 47. And he was actually into his coaching career already in 1998. And that's when he had a shift. And he'll tell you, I mean, if you look it up, he'll tell you all about it. But just looking at that and looking at different leaders across different platforms and understanding. One of the other ones is the Boeing movie on Netflix. I forget what that one is, the downfall of Boeing or whatever.
Okay.
You can take a lot of leadership stuff out of that. I mean, because what they talk about, and the funny thing is leadership is not a new topic. It's not a new thing. And if you watch that movie or that show, you'll see like Boeing had everything going for them at the beginning because they did have the true leadership. They had all the stuff, all of the meat and sauce that you would look for in leadership. And then at one point in time, they were bought and it shifted to a more profit-focused thing. So once that started shifting, then you start losing the culture. And now you see kind of where we are today with Boeing. I mean, the culture is pretty much completely shifted at this point.
Yeah.
And it's got to make a shift back. And that's where, like, when you start talking about things that you want, I mean, everybody wants a quality product. Everybody wants a quality service. And everybody wants to say, hey, we do this, but do you do this? Do you put in the work to do this? Do you do all the other things that come along with doing it? If you want quality product, you got to have quality people, which means you've got to invest in those people, the time and the effort and all the above to get them to that level, or you got to find people of that nature, right? I mean, you heard the statistics earlier. It's hard to find people with like some type of leadership ability, especially in the ARG space. I mean, you have to be your own leader for the most part.
Yeah. Well, and I think the biggest thing that we can take away from that whole statistic is you got to seek out some leadership training. Just because you think you know what a leader is doesn't mean you know what a leader is. You need to try and find some type of extracurricular training as far as that is concerned. Or, obviously you could read books and learn about different leaders and stuff like that. But being a leader, there's very few natural born leaders, right? You can learn a lot in that space, but there are things that you are going to have to actually learn how to handle as a leader in a space, especially when you're leading people. You're going to have to learn how to develop. There's a book that one of my managers gave me a long time, and it had like questions like, how do you deal with telling somebody he stinks at work? You know what I'm saying? And it like had the whole scenario and it had it all in there. And that was a great part of training for me because we did have guys who didn't wear deodorant at work, and so like it literally had all these questions. But, before that, I would be like, hey, bro, you smell like crap. Get out of here, or go wash yourself and put on some deodorant. You know what I'm saying? Like, but that's not exactly how you need to approach that. There are ways that you can approach these things in a certain way, but that's just like a super obvious thing of leadership. But like by setting the example, you are the one that is getting the change. I'm looking at this Nick Saban thing here, and there's 5 points. One is make routine decisions habitual so that they don't require mental energy. Focus on the process over the outcome. Be willing to hire towards your weakness. Control the story, and everything matters, right? And there's one thing that one of my friends says, and he's like, the way that you do one thing is the way that you do everything, And so if you slack on your hygiene, you slack on this, you slack on that, you're going to slack on what really matters. And so really, and if you start putting in your all on all those spaces, you might see yourself starting to put your all in every situation.
It's funny. So I want to tell you this statistic real quick because I already had it up on the screen, but
yeah.
You were talking about people actually having natural talent, and that was part of the statistics that I researched, and it's 10% of people actually add natural leadership talent. Another 20% do have some leadership talent with proper training, could become capable managers. And then the other point I make is this means to become a great leader, you must put in the time and effort to study and grow, right? Nobody naturally has it for the most part.
Well, I'm glad you are like in that space mentally and have been there, just because you're a good friend of mine, and so I care for my friends, and I like to know that you're also growing as a leader. It's a big deal when you start to self reflect and understand that, man, I don't know. It's like one day you just wake up and you're like you're mid 30s and you're like, man, I don't know shit. And I've been there for a while, and I'm like, how do I learn all this crap? And I think that as a leader in any space, that is the key. The first step is understanding that I don't know what I'm doing and I need to figure this out. And then you got to seek out that help.
Absolutely. I mean, and being disciplined. I mean, you were talking about the 5 points that mid-saving makes, but being disciplined enough to do it consistently is huge. I mean, you and I talked a little bit this morning about kind of my weight loss journey, but it was more of a way for me to understand me, and knowing that, hey, if I skip 2 days, I'm naturally going to say, okay, well, I can skip the third day. It's okay. I've already skipped 2 days, right? So when I first started out, I didn't even skip any days. It was every single day for like 3 or 4 months straight. I was doing it. I was doing something with fitness. And the reason being was because I understood myself enough to know that, hey, if I give myself any leeway, I'm going to take the easy road. And I don't want that. So staying with that consistency and that consistent approach, it goes into leadership too. Like, you have to consistently build who you are and what you're doing through self-growth. I mean, you can't depend on other people to grow you. You have to depend on you to grow you. Because everything I read, I don't take in to my leadership style, because it may not fit me. But even podcasts, like even this one, Joe, I mean, there's others as well, but podcasts are a great way to learn leadership or learn about leadership also. And I think it's fantastic that you're doing this.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. I think that the one thing that really pops into my head while you're talking about the consistency is nobody holds you accountable the way that you do. And nobody knows if you're bullshitting and lying except for you. Like, if you told everybody, hey man, I ate right today, but you didn't, like that means nothing, right? When you go to bed at night, no matter what you said, no matter what you've done, no matter who you've told, no matter how freaking amazing you made it sound, you're the only one that goes to bed tonight knowing that you did or you didn't do what you planned to do today.
It's funny because another thing is, because you were talking about that, is I heard another quote recently that just kind of really struck me. It's like, you better than anybody else. And if your counterparts don't see you investing in you, why would they invest in you?
Right.
And that's where for me it kind of struck too, because it's like, man, if I can't invest in myself to grow, like how can I expect anybody else to grow? It's just not going to be possible.
Well, you're being the change that you want to see, you know what I'm saying? And you're stepping out, leading your team. And I'm sure your kids see it, you know what I'm saying? Like they see dad out here doing his thing. I don't know how it is for you, but when I started like getting in shape and working on that, my kids went from sitting on the couch watching TV and eating snacks all the time to my son is now doing pull-ups at the house. He's doing push-ups all the time. Like, he wants to be like dad, right? And so those type of things are caught. They're not taught to your children. But leadership is something that needs to be taught. The military has leadership training for a reason. And it's not because everybody knows how to be a damn good leader already. It's because you got to learn how.
That's the truth. And it's crazy that, like, to see some of those statistics we talked about earlier, it kind of hits home a little bit, because you're like, man, most of the businesses out there, so we're saying 60% of the managers out there have had no training, and they're managing people. And so what are they passing along? And no wonder, like, we are kind of where we are in society, where, people don't have great communication skills. They don't have certain intangible items. And it's hard to watch it, for sure. But nobody's really investing in that leadership aspect. And honestly, all it takes is conversation, right? That's all it takes is conversation to get people inspired to grow and do better, or to help them see how to do better ultimately. Because a lot of people don't know. I mean, we're in a technology age right now or he can even get on AI, ChatGPT, and type in what's the best 5 leadership books, and it'll bring it up right now.
Yeah.
And you read those, and man, you can just pull in all kinds of data super quick nowadays. Whereas early on, they didn't have those opportunities either. So I can't fault them for that. But now we're in the data age. Everybody should be using it. Everybody should be like,
yeah, it's super easy to pull it up. I got ChatGPT right here. So, any question I have, I pull it up. But like the main thing is, do you do it? It's what you put into practice. It's not just knowing. Well, I just talked to somebody about this earlier. You don't learn how to drill a hole straight until you practice with the drill. You can read about it all you want. You can read about leadership and changing your life and doing all this stuff, but putting it into practice is one thing. And it's hard to be a good leader, because not only are you have to be consistent and you have to be disciplined, but you have to be empathetic, and you have to understand how people move and how people act and how to persuade people to do things even if they don't want to do it. You've got to figure this out. You got to be able to create a culture as a leader in the space that you're in that people are willing to follow. And that comes through you first figuring out yourself as a leader, figuring out what being a leader is, so that you can go lead. And I've said lead like 500 times now. My mouth hurts. But I mean, in all honesty, man, I'm really proud of you, dude. I think you're doing fantastic things over there at your organization. I think that your team really respects you. And I think that you, by starting with yourself, figuring out how does Brent become a leader for Brent, has really turned into a whole team of guys seeing a strong, good leader and seeing what that means. And it's not just you, it's Ricky as well, not just being good guys, because good guys are fun and they're cool and there's stuff like that, but being good leaders is different. Being able to have those hard conversations with your team, but in a way that they can understand that it's for the better of them, and it's better for the organization as a whole. And, I'm just super proud of you, dude. You guys are doing phenomenal things over there, and I see your team. So.
I appreciate that, Joe, but that's going in one ear and out the other. Like I told you earlier, I don't like to hear all the good stuff. I want to hear all of the bad. So
yeah, well, keep it up. Don't slow down. That's for damn sure, because somebody's going to come and take it. No, I love it, man. Well, in closing, man, is there anything that you'd like to say before we get out of here today?
Yeah, I mean, just get after it. We have a younger generation trying to get into even aircraft maintenance or whatever you're trying to get into. I would say just get after it, grow, dig into like leadership, whatever it is you need to grow into it, and do it for yourself, do it for your family and your kids, and just dive into it. I mean, of course, like growth happens when you're uncomfortable. And that's what, I try to inspire myself to do on a constant basis, is try to stay uncomfortable so I can continue to grow, right? I mean, all it takes for me is seeing one post from another company and I'm like, okay, I got to do some more growing. So then I'm diving in again. So it's just little things like that to where you've got to consistently find your why you're continuing to grow and what you're continuing to do, but also taking in industry experts or, people that you appreciate their opinions also. And I think that's also the thing, is be open to feedback. If you shut down feedback or you're very defensive, people aren't going to give you the feedback you need to actually grow. So that's also a factor involved.
Awesome. Well, Brent, I appreciate you coming out today and talking to us about leadership and self-development. Thank you for taking some time. I know you're a busy man. So, guys, that's the show. This is Flight Level Zero. I'm Joe Peebles, your host. If you like the show, if it made you think, and if you know anybody who might need to listen to it, please like and share it. Let them know about it. Thank you very much. This is Flight Level Zero. We're out.